Welcome to the Greater Culture Podcast, where we have conversations about how to elevate the quality of life through movement, nutrition, recovery, and mindset practices.
And welcome back to another episode of the Greater Culture Podcast. Your host, Brad Marshall here, and super excited to be joined by a good friend of mine, a colleague, a friend, Katy Tran Turner. Katy, thanks so much for spending some time with us on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. I always love our conversations. So it's kind of fun to have the chance to have one recorded as we talk through some of these things that I know both of us are super passionate about.
Yeah, Katy and I go way back, had an opportunity to work together at the collegiate level with the military, and then actually got to reconnect very recently with some consulting work. So I thought it would be a really fun conversation to dive into all the work that Katy gets to do and how she helps others improve their performances as well as the quality of their life through mental performance. And so I want Katy to be the one to describe and tell us a little bit about her journey and how she got into the field of mental performance, along with some of the teams and organizations and groups you've had a chance to work with. So, Katy, tell us a little bit about your story.
Sure. So I would think that some folks have maybe more of like a straightforward path in their life. Mental performance work wasn't exactly the area that I thought I would end up in. In college, I played field hockey. I was a goalie. I played at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And while I was there, I was majoring in biology and double majoring with exercise science. Thought I would want to go maybe to med school, maybe PA school. Um, Ended up having a pretty big knee surgery at the end of my college career, which kind of put a hold on my playing career. I was hoping to maybe try out for the national team and keep playing, seeing how long I could keep playing. But as I tried to figure that out, I went and did grad school at Kent State University and had the chance to coach field hockey there. I did my master's in exercise physiology, thinking that it could still help me for, future plans in some kind of perhaps like medical related profession, and ended up doing the programming for the team in terms of the conditioning blocks, and realized that we could physically change these young ladies' bodies. Like, they come in as freshmen, and over, periodic training, they would get bigger, faster, stronger. But then we put them in maybe like a fitness testing scenario or like a game scenario, and they would underperform. Like, they wouldn't run as fast as we know they could run, or they wouldn't execute the skills the way we knew they could execute the skills. And I actually witnessed an athlete choke in a high pressure game, like choke under pressure. And it was the first time I'd actually seen it live. And as a coach, I had no idea what to do to help. I didn't know what to say, didn't know what to do. The other assistant coach and I kind of did like good cop, bad cop, like he yelled at her and I tried to like encourage her, and it didn't help. And so that was the moment that I kind of, like, in my head, the penny dropped that there's more to training athletes, and there's got to be a systematic way to training athletes and high performers. So decided to go back and do my PhD at Florida State University in sport and performance psychology. So had a great experience there. From there, as you mentioned, worked at the college level a little bit, worked at the military, had the chance to go to Buffalo, New York, and work with professional teams up there. And then have spent some time as a professor at Michigan State, working in the athletics department a little bit as well. And now I think we're finally settled as a family in Williamsburg, Virginia, where I'm doing some private practice work at the college level, still a little bit with professional athletes, and getting to enjoy a little bit of the Williamsburg lifestyle as well, which has been fun.
It's awesome to hear how many different experiences you've had, different groups and organizations you've worked with over the years, and then delivering, these theories and these ideas to try and help people in real world situations do their best. It's a
Yeah.
field that, when asked, like, hey, what do you actually do? What is your job? Sometimes it can be challenging or difficult to describe it. I know I've experienced the same thing. So how have you come to describe or try and articulate to others, hey, I help people when it comes to mental performance? How do you think about or describe that to others?
That's such a great question, because to your point, like, I think it's a hard thing to make tangible. right? When I was studying exercise physiology and thinking about programming, the physical components of training are kind of tangible. You can write down like sets and rep structures and weight structures and rest periods and, all of those sorts of things. It feels very tangible. And even like the training portions, like you lift up this heavy thing and put it down, like this is the movement pattern, this is what it's supposed to look like. And then when it comes to mental performance, it feels so sort of abstract and not tangible for the athletes, the performers themselves. And so I think that's part of our role as mental performance consultants, is to help kind of explain what this looks like. I use a lot of analogies in my work, and one of the sort of best ways that I found to describe mental performance work is to use the analogy of like a car, and giving people the chance to like pause and lift up the hood of their car and like look at how the engine is working. And that's how I think of mental performance. It's a moment to like pause, and this work is a moment to pause and look at how we are interacting with our environment, how we are going about our daily stuff we do, how we're showing up in like performance moments, how we're training for those performance moments, and sort of like peel back the layers of this onion, lift up the hood of the car and look at the engine and say, like, how's it working? Like, what are my thoughts like? What are my energy levels like? What am I focusing on? How is my brain and my body connected and working for me or not working for me in certain ways? And so my job is to ask questions to help folks build on self-awareness. It's not necessarily to change everything that they're doing or say, you need this set and rep structure or something like that. It's to ask a question to help a person understand themselves more and understand like what makes them tick, and maybe what works now that didn't work in the past, or what used to work in the past that isn't working anymore, that maybe they want to think about changing or adjusting, or is there a different way of doing things? And so it feels very like not tangible, and yet we can make it tangible through some of the conversations that we have and exercises that we have, to help folks really think about their thinking, this idea of metacognition, like, are we thinking about our thinking so that it's helping us as much as possible?
Yeah, one of the things that I know I can certainly relate to is the challenge of trying to take these concepts we knew are helpful and put it into a way that people can see progress and development. If
Mm,
you were to go to a physical therapist and they identify an injury, they're going to give you certain exercises, rep schemes, movements to improve or enhance. If you are,
mhm.
lacking strength in a certain area, a strength coach is going to say, here's the movement, here's your reps, here's your sets. I can see improvement over time. It can be more challenging to do that when it comes to what's going on under the hood. And you're like, I don't really know what I'm thinking or feeling in certain moments or how I'm showing up. So, is there a way that you try and bring some of that to the surface? I know you're really skilled at asking great questions and trying to unpack that. But are there ways in which you try and bring some of these things that are maybe under the hood, not really in our awareness quite yet, but now I'm starting to think about it. I'm starting to bring an awareness and some conscious effort to, oh, yeah, this is actually how I think, or maybe how I feel, or, oh, I can actually do something about it. What are some of the
Yeah.
things you've seen or done over the years?
So I often start with asking folks what they look like at their best. And this is a
Mm,
really fun conversation, especially with high performers, because a lot of high performers are also very like critical of themselves, and they are quick to identify, well, I'm working on this, or I have to improve on this, or this other thing is like an area that I'm getting better at. But when you ask, like, when you're at your best, what do you look like? What's going on? How do you get there? They kind of pause and they're like, oh, I haven't thought about what I look like when I'm at my best in a long time. I spend a lot of time thinking about the things I have to do to get better, but not just like, I'm pretty darn good already. And that's a fun conversation because it helps get after the things that probably also add some enjoyment to their experience, whatever their performance is. Like when you ask someone, what do you like at your best? It's probably a time where they also really, really loved what they were doing and were like totally absorbed in it. And so it's a fun conversation to have. And it also gives a lot of insight into, well, if we know this is you at your best, how do we get there then? Like, how did you end up in that place? Was it completely random? Maybe it felt like that. But now that we know what you look like at your best, like what can we do to help you set the conditions for yourself, or frame this experience in a way that's going to give you the chance to be at your best? So that's probably a big
Mm.
area that I really enjoy exploring with folks. And I found that some folks really benefit just from taking that pause to give themselves credit for how effective they really are and how skilled or dynamic they can be in their performances.
Yeah, I think that's such a powerful skill and tool to leverage with folks. I love having those conversations and having people actually put pen to paper and write things out, sort of that strengths
Mm-hmm.
based approach of like, hey, what are we like at our best? And do you even know what that looks like? Can we
Yeah.
image or bring to mind a time in our life when we were? And they get really excited and they get fired up. And then you kind of ask that question, just like you said, of like, do you want to be there more consistently? And did
Yeah.
you know like there's actually ways in which we can systematically get you there? And so
Yeah.
once you've had that conversation and they get excited and fired up, what does it look like from there then? Like, because all of us are like, yeah, I definitely want to
Mm.
wake up feeling great and show up to my meetings and show up for my family and show up for all these things at my best. But for most of us, myself included, it seems like it's harder to show up as your best than to just show up as like, it's just another day.
Yeah. It takes a lot of intentionality, you know, like it takes a lot of doing things on purpose. I think your
Mm.
point though of like, do I just show up or do I take some time to think about how I want to show up? You know, even just like having that intention in our head or having that idea in our head of how we want to show up, that already puts us on the path of being more likely to get there. You know what I mean? So it is having a really clear picture and reminding ourselves of what that looks like. I also think we have to be realistic. Like when I work with folks, they figure out quickly I'm pretty pragmatic, in that we can't completely control everything and structure everything in our lives. We have to sometimes figure out like what is the most realistic, tangible action that we can put into play pretty quickly that will help us put us on the path to being at our best. And that's often sort of like one little change or committing to make one little adjustment in terms of our preparation or the way we think about an event or sort of the way we set ourselves up for these moments. Uh, and a lot of times I find that it comes down to kind of peeling back some kind of core fundamental belief or like framing that we have and how that belief is either is helping us or like getting in our way of allowing ourselves to be at our best. And I like that's my favorite part of the conversation because I think we've talked about this before, but I call this like the light bulb moment because I feel like we get to a point where, you know, the person I'm working with will say like, oh, that makes sense, you know, like, and it's usually something they just said. It comes out of their mouth and then they'll stop and they'll be like, oh, that makes sense. And it's a really cool moment to share with it with someone, because all of these other things going on sort of just become peripheral to this like one thing that explains their experience or explains their performance, good, bad, or ugly. But it just like adds this awareness and understanding. And then once we have that awareness, then, you know, we can make adjustments if we want to, or we can just move forward knowing more about how we go about our business, which is pretty cool too.
Mhm. Yeah. The intentionality and the purpose that we're able to show up to whatever event it might be can be one of the most important pieces. And something you said there that definitely resonated with me was this idea of understanding and being aware of our beliefs or even like our values. And even when I think about, people have different frameworks of how they conceptualize mental performance. I almost think of it like a pyramid, and like the base of that pyramid is most likely your beliefs and your values. Like we have to have an understanding of that, because then when we start layering on how you think, how you talk to yourself, the emotions that you are experiencing or show up with, the way you control your physiology, so much of that is derived from my beliefs or my values about myself or how I interact with others, that if we don't have an understanding of that, much of our day can feel like we're just getting tossed around of like, why am I
Yeah.
going through these highs and lows? And that type of work can be challenging, though.
Oh
Digging
yeah.
deep enough to find beliefs or find values, sometimes it's not the most easy or fun journey to make. Um,
Yeah.
have you seen or interacted with folks along the way in your work of like really digging into the weeds and like, hey, how do we figure this out for you? Because now we can start doing the fun work once we have a really good understanding of what your beliefs are, what your values are, what you stand for. And now
Yeah.
we get to have some fun.
I think that goes back to the idea that like as a mental performance consultant, I try to like set those expectations, right? That to
Mm,
do this work, it is hard work. Like yes, it's thinking and answering questions and it might not be like physically hard work, but that mental and emotional work of kind of like understanding ourselves and slowing down and pausing and just like tuning in to our own processes. Um, it takes a lot of effort. And so I try to make sure that folks understand that this is supposed to be challenging and it's supposed to be a little bit difficult. And if your first answer is, I don't know, that means I asked a great question, right? Because it's something maybe you haven't thought of before, maybe has been just automatic for you. And now we can bring it to like a level of understanding and awareness. Um, but I find that folks who are really, really passionate about what they do, who are interested in doing this kind of work, really dig into it. You know what I mean? Like they're willing to put in the energy that it takes to kind of understand themselves. And I also think it helps because I'm not saying we have to overthink every moment of every day and every experience. It's about taking a little bit of time to pause and do some deep thinking about ourselves and our experiences and our performances so that when we go out back into the fray, so to speak, like we can do that in a place where we can enjoy it more, or we can be freer, or we can have more of a sense of self and who we are and what we're there and what we're about, which then actually leads to less overthinking.
mhm.
So yeah, I think it's a good point that like folks who are thinking about doing this kind of work should know that like it is effortful. Um, and it's also really, one of my favorite questions to ask is like, well, where do you think that comes from? In terms of, emotions or experiences or behaviors, like where's that coming from? And it gives us a chance to think about like not just the bad things about us, but like the strengths and our values that our family has instilled in us and our life experiences have shaped us, and be true to those experiences as well. So some of that work, as challenging as it is, it's also kind of cool to have the chance to share with another person too, like these really impactful moments and people and experiences in our life, and bring them forward to make sure that they're still helping to shape us in the direction that like we want them to, so we can be at our best.
Yeah. Something that comes to mind based on what you said there is really this idea of stories. And when we start thinking of the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves, a lot of it comes from all of the different events we've experienced in our life up to that point. And when you get to start sharing those stories of things we've gone through or experienced with others, all of a sudden you start to unpack some things like, oh, that makes a lot of sense as to why I tell myself this, or I think this way, or I react this way because of some of these stories and things that I'm being more aware of. And now it gives us that skillful opportunity to like, do I like that? Do I want to keep going that way? Or maybe do I want to change it and do something a little bit different? And if we're not aware, we usually don't even get the choice. We're just kind of running down this path of it's how it's always been. And that's just what I
Yeah.
do. It's like, all right,
Yeah.
are you good with that? Or do we want something different?
And it's so busy, right? Like that's the number one answer that folks give you. Like, how are you doing? I'm busy, right? We get caught up in like the day to day, to for me, the to-do list or the calendar or all those things, that it is hard to really like pause and have that awareness for the moments that are most important for us, whether those are big key performance moments or moments that we really cherish with the people closest to us. But yeah, like otherwise it's on an autopilot kind of thing sometimes.
Yeah. There's a thread I'm really curious to pull on to get your perspective because you've worked with so many different populations and worked with folks at the highest level in their professions. We're big on and very passionate about this idea of the quality of life. Like we want folks to have a happy, fulfilled, meaningful, satisfied life. And part of that is figuring out like, what does that mean for you? Like, what does it mean to have a higher quality of life or be happy and fulfilled and satisfied? So I'm curious to hear from you and your perspective when you think of this concept of, elevating the quality of life, or what does it mean to be happy and fulfilled and satisfied? What does that mean for you as someone who works with a lot of professionals, also has a family and job and all these other things. But like, what does that mean for you?
Hmm. So my head goes to like sort of some of the exercise psychology work from when I was teaching at Michigan State for a bit. Like exercise is demonstrated to have like a really positive impact on quality of life, and that's a
Hmm.
has to be operationally defined. And when I think about my own definition, it's not a very like academic definition at all.
Right.
um,
Yep.
but I think for me, like quality of life is the ability to enjoy the present moment. Period.
Mm.
I think that's like if I
I
could like for
appreciate
me,
how
like,
simple that is.
yeah.
I just
I,
appreciate how simple that is because it is a very big, broad topic. And I feel like people are searching for it and they're figuring out and like they're chasing down the next fad, gimmick, whatever it is. They see so many things. Hey, add this to your morning routine, eat this thing, do this thing. And it's like, oh, that's going to keep improving. And maybe it will. But the idea for you and the concept of just being fully present and able to enjoy any moment, it sounds like, regardless of what's unfolding in front of you.
yeah. And I think like yeah, there's moments in life that are inherently unenjoyable, right? Like everything is not
Mhm.
intrinsically motivating. Everything is not intrinsically enjoyable and wonderful. And can we still, in the face of the highs and lows, in those lows, enjoy the present because it is the present and it's what we have to some extent. Maybe in those
Mhm.
moments we appreciate the present a little bit, just being there. But I think for me, like captures the idea that it can be we can do things to help those present moments be more enjoyable. Um, but honestly, I think the biggest part of it is just tuning in to the present moment so that we don't miss
Mhm.
it, and so that we can enjoy it. So I think when I think about the idea of quality of life, like that's what it comes down to.
Yeah. A lot of mindfulness concepts weaved into that response there. One being this idea of acceptance and not resignation, but acceptance of acknowledging that's the way life is right now. And when we are able to do that, it does give us some sense of, if you want to call it control or just like, hey, I can, dictate how I respond right now because I'm accepting that's the way life is. And whether it's pleasant or unpleasant, it's just the way it is. And then also just the idea like this is the moment we get. We can't really
Hmm.
control what happened before, what's coming up. So this moment is what I have. What do I want to do with it? And so
Yeah.
those concepts really resonate with me. I think it's one of the reasons we're on the same wavelength. And I'm curious. So you've got your sort of definition and framework. When you think about working with others, I mean, we're trying to help them either achieve something business related, professionally in athletics, collegiately, whatever that might be. Do you see that as sort of a common thread of like, we're trying to help improve the quality of their life, which for them may be some sort of achievement?
Hmm.
But how do you make sense of that with your work and how you're helping others?
Yeah, I think that's actually really interesting that you mentioned the idea of like high performers reaching an achievement in order to improve their quality of life. And that's actually probably sort of central to a lot of the work that I would do with high performers in the idea that it's not about that achievement. Because say you get it, say you win it, say you achieve the goal and accomplish the goal, well, then what? You're still going to have another moment. You're still going to have another present moment to enjoy. So, but that goal is over. So, what do you do then?
Mhm.
Right? Like, so can you still enjoy the present moment with or without that goal? And just recognize that setting the goal and working towards an achievement and working towards, an accomplishment is motivating and inspiring and is part of what can drive us forward, um, and it's not the thing that necessarily has to define our quality of life and define
Mhm.
our ability to enjoy the present moment. um, when I do some work with executives and folks, sort of in the corporate space, and there's always going to be another project in those areas, right? Like there's always going to be another email. There's always going to be another fire to put out. There's always going to be more. So if the only sense of satisfaction and accomplishment and like, you know, achievement and high performance is by getting this stuff done, then we're never going to get it all done. We're sort of setting ourselves up for um, constant failure or striving without like having the opportunity to appreciate and enjoy where we are, the here and now, and the present
Hmm.
moment. So I think when I work with high performers, there's a real balance there, because I'm not saying that those um, outcome goals don't matter, right? Like those championships and those, the recognition and the achievements, those do matter socially and individually as well. And they have to have their place in terms of our life and the bigger picture of our life, I would say.
Hmm. Yeah, I think it's a really powerful message for really anyone to hear, that it's great to set goals or maybe have some level of expectation of something you're striving towards or want
Mhm.
to accomplish. And it's also great to understand that the journey and the process and what you learn along the way can be as important, sometimes even more important,
Mhm.
because it sets us up for so many other things in our life. Of, like you said, whether you're in the corporate space, whether you're a parent, whether you're in athletics, it's like there's always something you're working towards. And it's the figuring it out, it's the problem solving, it's the identifying who you are in different situations that leads us to, hopefully, hey, I can handle any moment. I have this chance or this opportunity to do this big presentation or lead this meeting or get on the field for this specific game. And I am fired up and I'm ready for it because I've done so much of the work leading up to it. I know it's a quote that's kind of gotten tossed around the internet a lot lately, but it's this idea that the person who loves walking will go much further than the person who only loves the destination. And it's like, how do we help people to love the walking and love the journey and love the process? Have you
Mm.
seen in your work that those who tend to either excel or achieve maybe what they'd like to or set out to are those who are very process focused and very like, I just have my habits, I've got my practices, and I am just maniacal when it comes to my consistency around that?
Yeah, I think it's also being okay with the the sort of blandness of the process.
Mm, mm-hmm,
Like winning the championship, or like getting the promotion or closing the big deal, whatever. Like those things feel emotionally awesome,
mm-hmm.
right? They
Yeah.
feel incredible. We have this huge like dopamine response, and like hormonally, like they just feel awesome. So I think it's not even necessarily like just being very process oriented. It's actually being okay with like the process is not that exciting. And there's a lot of
Mm,
things here in this process that I can't control. And I'm okay letting go of some of those things and accepting sort of the unpleasantness of what's right in front of me, and still recognizing like I can enjoy this moment. Right. So I think there's a level of um, sort of embracing sort of the bland, tedious nature that is part of the slow and steady work of just being a consistent high performer. And I think that's the other word that I often throw in there is consistency. And folks that are very process oriented or happy to just stay in the process, they tend to also be very consistent. They don't like have the high highs and the low lows quite as much. Um, but the process can be a grind, and it can be really challenging in some performance spaces, where why am I even doing this process when we're not getting any of the outcomes that we would hope for? And I think that's where it comes back to like really your our core values and beliefs and the ability to be who we want to be through this process. Like this is the chance for me to demonstrate who I am by sticking with these patterns and behaviors and things that are not really even like as rewarded as they probably should be.
yeah. It's amazing how they all sort of weave into one another. Of, if I can be aware of my values and my beliefs, it helps me to understand the type of person I want to be. And we hear a lot of that when it comes to habit formation or engaging with the process and the practices. Is if I can see myself as someone who makes certain choices when it comes to my nutrition, if I can see myself as someone who is diligent or consistent in my movement practices, that is going to be much more effective for engaging in the daily behavior than to say, I'm going to do an hour in the gym, X number, blah, blah, blah. Like, then you can let yourself off the hook. But if you tell yourself and believe, like, I am the type of person who does this, it's really hard to let yourself off the hook then, or it's really going against who you see yourself as. So it
Mm-hmm.
sounds like the consistency and feeling or being able to put things into practice day after day after day comes down to knowing who you are, knowing what you stand for, and knowing what are the things that you're either maybe not willing to budge on, or the things that are really, really meaningful because you know they help you to be the type of person that you'd like to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it gives you the ability to handle some of those like maybe more stressful or more high pressure moments, because it's not necessarily about the moment or the environment or the demands anymore. It's about the resources you have within you to handle whatever life is going to throw at us, to
Mhm.
continue then to be able to like enjoy it no matter what.
Yeah. And one of the things I know that's important when it comes to consistency is figuring out like what are those actual practices? What are the habits that are meaningful or helpful? And like
Mm.
we said before, like there's so much noise out there right now. I mean, if you were to engage in a morning routine based on what you see, you'd be waking up 3 hours before you start your day just to get your morning routine done of all the things that you should be doing, let alone what you do the rest of the day. So I'm curious, from your work or even your own experiences, we love coming up with some practical, concrete examples. Are there things you've seen, interacted with, or helped others to implement or put into their day or maybe try out that are little things that can help somebody when it comes to the mental side of their day to day, staying consistent, being able to put themselves in a position where they can be the type of person they want to be?
So I think of two really specific things that I sort of often talk through with folks, and they will look different in practice for each individual person, right? So I always say that to begin with. But one is the idea of taking time to tune into the present moment, sort of like checking in with yourself every once in a while. Like, can you take a moment to tune into where you are, to tune into how you're feeling, to tune into what's going on for you? And I like that as a strategy because it's a very much like on the fly strategy. We're not adding anything else to your day that you have to like stop and take things away or add on or anything like that. It's sort of it's the process of whatever you're doing, can you really just like tune in to yourself? No distractions, no like busyness with your mind on other things, but like what's going on for me, or what am I experiencing, or even like what is my environment like right now? Do I notice my environment if I'm walking outside? Do I pay attention to the weather and the blue skies and the breeze and things like that? So tuning into ourselves a little bit more, really intentionally and purposefully. Um, And the other one is giving ourselves a little bit of a mental recovery moment. And I say that because I think, like, for a lot of folks in various performance areas, once their alarm goes off, they're like hit the ground running, and it's nonstop until their head hits the pillow, right? Like, and that's really, really physically fatiguing, but it's also very mentally, cognitively fatiguing. So I talk a lot with folks about building in time to like quiet our mind down, whether that's 30 seconds or whether it's 1 minute, to give ourselves kind of like a mental reset in terms of energy. You know, power naps obviously awesome if you could do that, but even if we could just quiet our brain down, focus on our breathing. I love to suggest to folks, like, when you're washing your hands, take that minute to 2 minutes to just like focus on your breathing, quiet your mind down, right? You are obviously, what are you doing? You're washing your hands. You don't really have to think about that. So what are you probably doing? Your brain is running away with whatever thing that it's worrying about or thinking about or planning for. It's not doing anything. You're not like accomplishing anything. So for that minute, 2 minutes, focus on your breathing, quiet your mind for that amount of time. Just give yourself that little bit of a break. to help with some of that cognitive fatigue that I think builds up over the course of the day. So sort of on the fly, tangible things that we can do that hopefully won't add to, someone's day, but they could maybe just layer it into things that they're already doing.
I love that it's not an adding or trying to put something else into the day, because most of us, like you said, are already saying how busy we are, and there may not be a
Mhm.
lot of time to squeeze more elements into it. So taking those moments of when you're going about your day as if you normally are, hey, take a second to tune in. How are you in this moment? And you don't necessarily even have to change or do anything different. Just check in, see.
Mhm.
Vice versa, of taking those moments of maybe a little bit of silence. I think our worlds these days are so noisy, and we find so many things to fill them up. I know I am 100% guilty of that, where if I have moments of silence, it's like, why am I not listening to a podcast or watching a YouTube or reading a book? It's like, you got to fill the time with something, and it can
Am
be
I being
overwhelming. So
efficient?
those two stresses. Yeah, right. And you're like, I'm not learning, I'm not growing, I'm not moving forward. And then you start to get frustrated with yourself. And it's like, it's okay. We can take a moment. And you spoke to this idea of quieting the mind. And I think that can be such a challenging process or even experience for folks. If you start to spend a little time in silence, whether it's the drive home, whether it's on your back porch or at your kitchen table, all of a sudden it's like, whoa, my mind is getting a lot noisier and I'm tuning into so many more thoughts. So when you think about this idea of quieting the mind, how do you tee it up or, explain that to someone?
Yeah, I think like the analogy of noise is a great one to talk about, like how all this other stuff is just sort of noise. And for me, it's helping folks figure out like we're not going to go like blank, right? We're not going to think about nothing really. So what can we pick to think about, to focus on? Like, what is the target? What is the thing that we want our thoughts to be on in the moment, for that minute or whatever it may be? Um, and then really, really purposefully like staying on that one thing instead of going to all the other noise. And I think that ability to just focus on one thing instead of all of the big picture things or all of the other things that are going on is pretty powerful. So even like the hand washing example, you could think about your breathing, or you could really just think about washing your hands. Like that could be the other one thing that
Mhm.
you're thinking about. But whatever it is, it's just that one thing. And I
Mhm.
think like, that's pretty powerful to give ourselves that space to just have a little bit of quiet. We don't have to be constantly acquiring knowledge or information or thinking about things or planning or, all that executive functioning is awesome. And we don't have to do it all the time. We can take a minute to quiet our brain, to give ourselves a little bit of that mental break. Um, so I think like first, like to your point of like, we have to allow ourselves to take that silence is pretty important as well. But yeah, I would say like pick that one thing that you want to focus on and just like see if you can focus on just that one thing, whatever it is.
Mhm. It's such a potent form of attention training, as
Mhm.
someone who's well versed in how fickle our attention can be and how quickly it seems like it wants to wander off and go in different directions. Spending a moment or two of just like, what do I actually want to think about? What do I actually want my attention to be on now? Does actually help train and rewire your brain to do so. And it
Mhm.
also opens up this whole world that like I can be intentional with where I want not only my attention to be, but how I want to be. And if I'm washing my hands, maybe I'm thinking about, what's how I want to be in the next moment, or maybe how I've been so far today. And it gives me that chance to just check in, tune in, see, oh, yeah, great job. Appreciate that. Put that in the box of like, let's keep that going. Or maybe like, ooh, that was not a great way to respond or think about something. Let's see if we can be a little bit better, more skillful next time we come across that situation. So I like those like very practical, tangible examples. Spending some time just tuning into the present moment, noticing where your feet are, noticing what's going on around you, and then tuning into, hey, what's going on in my head? What's going on in my body? And just moving forward from there. Two really good ways that we can tune into the present moment, which align beautifully with your idea of a quality of life, is enjoying and being tuned in to the present moment. And one of the questions we love to ask our guests is, we're big on this idea of understanding and being aware of beliefs and values and the things that drive you. I'm curious if you have a few different values, beliefs,
Mm.
things that really drive you that have led you down the path of competitor into student into working in all these different domains and now as a mom at home. So, what are the things that sort of guide or influence the way that you see or interact with people?
So it's so fun and fascinating to like do this work that we get the chance to do, and then also have it show up in our everyday life, in our relationships and our interactions and things like that. And I think I've learned the most about my own beliefs when I learn about how they may be the same or different from my partner's belief and my family members' beliefs and things like that. So the ones that come to mind uh, definitely are ones that have been like interesting to realize, like, oh, not everybody shares that belief with me, right? Like this is actually Katie's belief, not
Hmm.
just like a world truth. Um, so one of my beliefs is okay, so I'm going to preface this with I have come to find as I get older, I guess, more and more that like the phrases of our grandparents are so true. Like we've been talking this whole time about like being in the present moment, taking a break, enjoying the present. And like the phrase that goes through my head is like, take time to stop and smell the roses, right? Like we have to take time to stop and smell the roses. And like phrases like that, like count your blessings, things like that, that like folks generations before us have been telling us to do for years on years on years. Now, like there's science to back it and all that kind of stuff. But when I think about my beliefs, I always think about like, these things come from like your history and your stories and your experiences and how incredibly fortunate I've been in my life to have these great experiences. So beliefs that drive Katie. One of them is wherever you go, leave places better than you found them. And I find that I have that strong belief in terms of like physical places, right? Like if I go to a playground with our kids and I see trash on the ground, like I'm going to pick it up and I'm going to throw it in the trash can. And like I get teased about that, but like we should leave a place better than we found it physically. And also like workplaces and projects and businesses and relationships, like leave it better than you found it, like in some way shape or form, like leave a mark there that's going to help people or improve things or improve the experience for those coming after you. So that's like a really, really fundamental belief for me. Another belief that I have is that people will help people. Like I really genuinely and believe that like people help each other, and we're social creatures and we need other people, and so people will help people. And so I guess that's partly obvious in the work that I do, right? Like I like to help others. So
Hmm.
I believe
Hmm.
that people help people. I also have beliefs around sort of like anything worth doing is worth doing well, right? And like the standard is excellence. I have a really, really strong core belief around like if your standard should be excellence. And that's a challenging belief to have all the time. It can be really exhausting. And I have to remind myself that it doesn't have to actually apply to everything. Like I can be completely average at, some things in my life, and that's okay.
Hmm.
Because trying to be excellent at everything is exhausting. But I do think that like in the things that I really care about, like excellence is the standard. And if you're going to do it, like do it darn well. So I guess those would be a couple that like come to mind sort of off the top of my head. You know me pretty well, so I think probably you've seen those things come through to some extent.
Oh, yeah. And what's always fascinating to me is if people find that the beliefs they have stay pretty stable, or if they
Mhm.
change over time, like you said, like, oh, I added in a significant other, I got to meet their family now, or now we added kids to the mix, or I went to a new job, or I moved to a new state. And all of a
Mm.
sudden, like those things that you hold on to or were beliefs, they get challenged and they either stand the test of time
Mhm.
or you decide, oh, interesting, let me tweak that or make that a little different. And the general ones that you have of leaving places better than you found it, The standard is excellence. Those sound very like athletic driven, like athlete, like an athlete would say that, of like, you want to leave the school better than you found it. If you're showing up for practice, like that excellence is, the benchmark we're striving for.
Mhm.
Would you say that's kind of where you found and developed those, or did you think it's just,
Yeah. Actually, no, like that didn't even strike me as a connection. I think athletics
mm,
maybe gave me the chance to demonstrate those values. But I
yeah, yeah,
100% would attribute them to my parents. Like I know it. I know
mm,
like because my mom will pick up trash if she sees trash at the playground. You know what I mean? Like that's the model that I saw. And my dad is the one that was excellence is the standard. And that was what the standard was. You know what I mean? For him, it was be excellent. Like if you're going to do it well. So if you're going to do a job, make sure you do it to completion and to a really high standard and high quality. So I am really certain that like it came from my family and had the chance to
mm,
sort of like live it through sport and maybe demonstrate it through sport. Um, but I do like your point of like these beliefs that stay with us over time. Like now that I look back on like years of experiences and way too many jobs and places that we've lived and things like that, like, yeah, those are the threads that are kind of consistent for me. Um, and there's some that are sort of newer. I think that as we go through life, we learn more about ourselves, and learn about ways of like framing experiences and framing the world that's going to be helpful, right? That's kind of what our work is in the mental performance world. And one that I kind of came to realize when I was older, I think even maybe recently in the last like 5 to 10 years, 5 years or so, is the idea that like I'm built to do challenging things. Like that's how I'm built. Like I'm built to do challenging things. So when life is challenging, when life is stressful, when you know my husband moved to Williamsburg, Virginia without us, and the kids and I were still living in Michigan, and I was teaching, and the kids were, doing sports and all over the place and everything. We're juggling all this stuff, moving a family, trying to work full time. That was challenging. How do I frame it now? I can frame it in this understanding like I'm built to do tough things. I'm built for this. So it's okay that it's difficult and challenging. Like I can enjoy it because this is what I'm built for. Um, yeah. So it's interesting how they evolve too, I think, throughout the course of our life and the many different experiences that we'll have.
yeah, that's such a powerful statement to say, and then have some belief and some backing behind it of like, I can do difficult things, or I was built for challenging moments. That gives us such a confidence to be able to walk into any situation and know like, hey, I've got what it takes to navigate this, whether it's a
Mhm.
life decision of moving, changing jobs, changing states, whether it's a performance moment where you're uncertain or haven't been in that situation before. It's like you have so much evidence, and the way you talk to yourself and the way you show up, it's amazing, and it's so cool to see how it's all threaded together, which
Mhm.
does lead me into a question. So you've spent pretty much most of your life now helping others to achieve and work towards their goals, figuring out how do we tweak and tune the mental side of performance to be able to show up and be your best. I'm curious, from your perspective, you're a human as well, so what are some of the practices, habits that you engage in that allow you
Mhm.
to be your best day in and day out? It's so fascinating to see how we work with others and try and figure out and help them develop their habits or their behaviors or how they show up. But I'm just curious to hear if there's things that you've come across that you're like, you know what, these are sort of my staples, that if I do these each day, helps me to show up my best, be great at home, be good at my work, whatever that might be for you.
Mhm. So the idea when you mentioned the morning routine, I realize that that's something that is really helpful for me. Like if I can have a
Hmm.
little bit of quiet in the morning, have a cup of coffee before the chaos starts, that helps. And that's all. It's not like elaborate. It's just if I can have some quiet and a cup of coffee, the day tends to just feel better for me. Um, Possibly because I'm not really a morning person. So those are the things that are most helpful. So when I'm consistent with that, like I know that it has a big impact. The other things that I would say help me are I'm big on like kind of the night before having a clear picture of what's going on the next day. So whether that is a to-do list or the calendar or the schedule or what kind of chaos is going on wherever, um, that intentionality of preparing the night before for what's coming up tends to also help me feel like I'm able to be my best in those moments, whatever's coming. And then the third thing I would say is that the more I can just be in the present moment, the more effective I am, right? Like whatever I'm
Hmm.
doing, I try to just be right there doing that thing because I know there's other stuff that I need to do. There's other stuff I need to take care of. Yes. But if I can't do it right now or I'm not doing it right now, thinking about that other thing while I'm doing this different thing isn't going to help me be more effective at this thing. Um, so the more that I can just be in the here and now, the more effective I am. It's really interesting when I work one on one with clients and high performers. If I'm talking with someone or working with someone, but my mind is wandering, I know I'm not at my best for that particular session. And it could be because, I'm hungry or I'm tired or I'm underfueled or I need to move, like I've been sitting too long, whatever those things are. But I like can catch myself like, oh, my brain has wandered. I have to let me be back in this present moment. Like, let's refocus and stay in the here and now with this person. So I try to apply that to like lots of other areas. The area that I'm worst at this, if I'm going to be totally honest with folks, is like when I'm cooking. I would love to just be able to like be here and now cooking and enjoying the senses and the colors and this, all of those things. But that's the time that I struggle the most in terms of like staying in the present moment because I tend to be like thinking about the next thing and the next thing and the next thing and whatever is going on in the background too. So that's an area I'm still trying to get better at in terms of just being in the present.
I love that you are aware and know, hey, here's the staples. And if I veer too far off the path, like then it becomes a little bit more chaotic, hectic, and I'm not able to show up the way I'd like to. So even if it's like, I got to make sure I got my 5 to 10 minutes for my cup of coffee in the morning. I know the night before I'm mentally either rehearsing or writing down some to-do list that just helps me to put my mind at ease to get a good night's rest. And then taking those little micro moments throughout the day of just tuning in, checking in, and then still being realistic. Like, hey, there's moments where, yeah, I'd love to cook, but if the kids are doing something or husband's doing something and you're all over the place, like that might just be life. And that's how it is in that moment. And that's okay too. So finding the opportunity to navigate and be good with all of those things. It's interesting too, because I think as people can probably tell, and I've known this about you, is you're somebody who's very passionate about what you do. And when you get to work with folks, like it really comes through in the stories and the messages and the care that you have. So I'm curious if you have a sense of like what gets you really excited or what do you love most about, the work that you get to do? Because I know a lot of folks out there would probably love to have a greater
Mhm.
sense of either passion or excitement for what they do. And not saying that the job has to deliver or provide that, maybe you're fortunate enough that it does. But for you, when you think about like what gets you really excited to do the work, over a decade in and still work with a variety of different clients, what
Mhm.
is it for you that really drives you?
I think it's those light bulb moments, but it's
Mm.
not just the light bulb itself. It's knowing that what goes into getting to the light bulb moment, right? Because I get super excited when I realize that like I'm here and I'm in the present moment with these other people or this other person, and I'm really listening to them. Like, really, not just hearing what they're saying, but like I'm listening to what they're saying and I'm trying to understand. And I'm really curious about what their experiences are. And I hear something that sort of just like, it's like the nugget, right? Like I call it the nugget. Like let me pull this nugget out and like
Hmm.
let's just talk about this a little bit. And then that is what leads to the light bulb, right? Like that process to me is what it's all about. And if it's like a group environment as well, like we've done like group workshops, being in the room with them and like listening to what they're talking about and what their experiences are, what their challenges might be, and what's worked for them, like really hearing and then being able to adjust and adapt and talk about the things and focus in on the concepts that are going to resonate the most. Like that's the thing that like gets me fired up about the work that we get to do.
Hmm.
So it's knowing that it takes this like really dedicated commitment to being in the present moment, this willingness to really listen to other folks, and then the ability to like connect the pieces so that they can have this experience where maybe they're realizing something or learning something or connecting with a concept that they hadn't connected with before.
Mhm. What's interesting is the level of care and empathy of, okay, I have ideas, concepts, learnings, but to get into the actual trenches with them and try and understand the world through their eyes, and then say, like, hey, we can work together collaboratively to get you on the path towards whatever it is that you're working towards and want to achieve or accomplish. Like, there's such a level of care there that's really cool. And it weaves its way through the beliefs you have of how you show up, how you help others, what you've come to know, and how skillful you are in that, and how you've developed that over the years. So, with that, I want to say, Katy, thanks so much for taking some time to chat with me and catch up on the Greater Culture podcast. Somebody I've always appreciated working with, and I'm so glad that recently we got to interact and co-facilitate a training that was super fun. I'm excited to see how things continue to unfold. And thanks for sharing some of your insights on ways in which folks can tune into the present moment, maybe a little more consistently, tune into what's going on upstairs and in their head and in their bodies, and how that might help to improve the quality of their life so that they can go out and be the type of person who they'd like to be. So thanks so much for spending some time today with me.
Thanks for having me. It was really fun. I always love having these conversations with you.
All right. Sweet. That was great.